My son snatched my chair at dinner, so I pulled the ground out from under him. Mark thought it was just a chair, but when he took that seat, he unknowingly set the stage for his downfall. Helen had been patient but no more. In one swift move, she turned the tables, taking control of everything he thought he owned. And now nothing would ever be the same. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The scrape of wood against tile was sharp, too sharp. Helen had just stepped into the dining room when she saw Mark's hand shoot out, fingers curling around the back of the high-backed oak chair. Her chair. With a smirk that barely touched his eyes, he slid into it smoothly and crossed his arms like he'd claimed a throne. "Sorry, Mom," he said, already reaching for the breadbasket. "You're too slow these days." Helen blinked, her fingers still hovering above the carved spindle. Her joints ached from the early evening chill that slipped in through the drafty window, but not as much as her chest did now. Tina, already nestled next to Mark, let out a breathy laugh. "Sit anywhere. Doesn't matter, does it?" Helen's eyes moved to the only seat left, a wobbly, backless kitchen stool, half an inch shorter than the rest. She pressed her lips into a thin line and moved toward it, spine stiff, heart steady. The stool creaked beneath her, lopsided on the uneven tile. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands to keep her balance. Dinner smelled of rosemary chicken and overcooked green beans. Helen had made both. Mark was already halfway through his second serving. "So," he said, between bites, "I was thinking of knocking out the wall between the den and the living room. Really open up the space once we modernize things." Tina lit up like someone had handed her a gift box. "Ooh, and heated flooring. My sister got it when they renovated last year. Game changer." Helen didn't lift her eyes. She swallowed the dry chicken and washed it down with tepid water. Mark's fork clinked against his plate. The scrape echoed louder than it should have. After dinner they left her to clean up. Dishes clattered, her knuckles brushing suds as she scrubbed the pans. The scent of garlic and detergent mingled in the air, sharp and sour. Upstairs, she heard laughter. Tina's voice rose high, then dropped into a mocking whisper. By the time she sat on her bed, the house was silent again, lit only by the hallway nightlight. Mark insisted on keeping, for safety he'd said, though he never cared for hers. The phone rang at 9:02. Helen answered before the second ring. "Did he really take your chair?" Gloria's voice was a loaded pistol. Helen exhaled slowly. "He did. That damn boy. You raised him better than this." Gloria's Missouri twang thickened with fury. "You feed them, house them, and they treat you like a squatter." Helen said nothing. Her fingers absently traced the floral stitching on her quilt. "Listen to me," Gloria snapped. "They treat you like a tenant. You remind them who owns the damn building." "I intend to," Helen said quietly. There was a pause, then Gloria's voice dropped to a knowing hush. "You still have the papers." Helen didn't answer right away. Her eyes had drifted toward the antique walnut dresser in the corner. Second drawer down, beneath the winter gloves and expired coupons, sat a locked metal box. "I have them," she said finally. Gloria's voice sharpened. "Then let's make this official." Helen's hand curled around the receiver tighter. Her pulse was steady, but her chest felt lighter than it had all day. The pressure of silence was lifting. The humiliation, no longer dormant, had found direction. She rose from bed and crossed the room, each step slow and deliberate. When she pulled the drawer open, the metal box sat where she'd left it years ago. It was cold in her hands. She placed it on the bed, sat beside it and opened it with a key that had waited too long for its purpose. A thin film of dust coated the documents inside, but the name on the deed, hers and hers alone, was perfectly legible. From downstairs she heard Mark laughing at something on the TV. Helen didn't blink, didn't move, just listened, as if imprinting his voice into memory. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow the ground shifts. She clicked the box shut and rose to her feet, spine straighter than it had been all day. "If he wants to take my chair," she whispered, eyes sharp as glass, "I'll take the ground he's standing on." The lock clicked with a sharp metallic snap, like the lid on a coffin. Helen lifted the steel box from the dresser drawer and carried it to her bed, the cool metal sending a chill through her palms. It had been untouched for years, but not forgotten, never forgotten. She flipped it open, and a puff of dust rose into the air, catching the lamplight in a haze. The contents inside hadn't changed, only the stakes had. Beneath yellowed documents and brittle receipts lay the ribbon-bound deed, its edges still crisp, untouched by time or greed. She pulled it out gently, the paper whispering as it unfolded. Her name, Helen E. Granger, sat alone on the title. No co-owner, no spouse, no son, just her. The house they lived in, the one she scrubbed and repaired and paid off in full, was hers. And he'd stolen her chair like he was doing her a favor. She stared at the document, hands steady now, and reached for her phone. "Don't tell me," Gloria answered after one ring. "He made another crack?" Helen's voice was soft but iron hard. "He took my chair," Gloria hissed. "Oh hell no, that's smug bloated. I took something too," Helen said, cutting through her. "The deed, found it." There was a long pause, then Gloria's voice dropped to a low hum of satisfaction. "You got the bullets now. All you need's a trigger." Helen smiled faintly. "They treat me like a tenant," she said. "Time to remind them I'm the landlord." "Better," Gloria snapped. "Be their eviction notice." The words landed like steel. Helen hung up without saying goodbye, her heart thrumming with clarity. She didn't feel petty. She felt precise. Downstairs, the TV murmured. Tina's voice floated up now and then, sharp and brittle like cheap glass. Helen tuned it out. She opened her laptop and typed in the name Victor Shaw. The attorney's website hadn't changed since she last used it. Navy background, gavel logo, tagline, "We don't negotiate with entitlement." She clicked schedule consultation. The call came within 10 minutes. "Mrs. Granger," Victor said smoothly. "Pleasure to hear from you again. What can I help you burn down today?" Helen didn't smile. "My son thinks he's inherited a kingdom. I'd like to remind him who the crown actually fits." Victor chuckled softly. "I'm assuming there's documentation to back that crown." "Clear deed," Helen replied. "No liens. All mine." His tone shifted, sharper now. "If you're ready, we'll gut them legally." "I don't want a bandage," Helen said. "I want removal." "Then let's begin." After she hung up, Helen didn't sleep. She spent the rest of the night rereading every page in that lockbox, sorting them by decade, labeling folders by hand, sealing everything in plastic sleeves. When the sun broke the sky in soft oranges, she was already in the kitchen making coffee. Black, strong, bitter. The hallway creaked. Mark padded in, yawning, stretching. He dropped into the oak chair without a glance at her, like it had always belonged to him. "You know," he said through a mouthful of toast, "this house'll be mine soon anyway. Might redo the floors once it is. Get rid of that squeak. Drives me nuts." Helen turned to refill her coffee, her expression unreadable. "Is that so?" "Oh yeah," he said, nodding. "It's just a matter of time, right?" The mug was warm in her hand. She took a long sip before answering, savoring the heat. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her voice didn't waver. "Time," she said slowly, letting the words settle between them, "has a funny way of running out." Mark didn't look up from his eggs. He was too sure, too smug, too blind. Helen just watched him, the silence stretching like wire under tension. He had no idea he'd already lost the house. He just hadn't noticed the ground shifting beneath his feet. The sizzle of bacon filled the kitchen, but the smell turned Helen's stomach. She stood at the stove, spatula in hand, as the grease popped and hissed like it knew what was coming. Behind her, Mark scrolled on his phone, bare feet tapping against the linoleum, rhythm cocky and careless. "You know what opened this place up?" he said, not even looking up. "Rip out that wall by the stairs. Expand the kitchen. Throw in an island. God, the resale value'd skyrocket." Helen placed 2 eggs on a plate, the yolks unbroken, golden and perfect. Her hand hovered just a second too long before she set the plate on the table in front of him. He didn't say thank you. He never did. Tina floated in next, draped in one of Mark's oversized t-shirts, coffee already in hand. "Ooh yes," she chimed in, slipping onto the bench beside him, "and maybe we knock out that tiny guest room. I mean once Mom's, moved on." Helen sat across from them, napkin folded neatly on her lap, toast untouched. Tina giggled, taking a sip. "I mean honestly, babe, we could make that her old room into a walk-in closet. Finally some space for our stuff." Mark nodded, mouth full of eggs, "and a soaking tub. Always wanted one of those." Helen lifted her glass of water slowly, carefully, as if balancing something far more dangerous than liquid. She sipped, swallowed, said nothing. The fork in her hand felt heavier than it should. Mark grinned at her across the table. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll keep a little corner of the place for you. Picture on the wall, maybe." She smiled faintly, an expression so practiced it had become muscle memory. Inside, something coiled. After they left the table, Helen sat in silence, sunlight pouring through the window in warm, dappled patches. She didn't move until the kitchen emptied of sound. Then she rose, set her full plate in the sink, and picked up her phone. Victor answered before the second ring. "I need to know if the taxes are current," she said without preamble, "and if any names have changed on the records." Victor's voice was crisp. "I've already started that audit." Helen's hand tightened around the phone. "And, property's fully paid. No liens, still under your name exclusively. For now." "For now?" Her voice was quiet, dangerous. Victor's tone dropped a degree. "There's been an attempt to alter the file at the tax assessor's office. Sloppy, but intentional." The kitchen spun for a second, then stilled. Helen's jaw locked. "Someone tried to add their name to the property?" "Yes. Submitted a copy of the deed with handwritten amendment. Scribbled in ink, like a child forging a permission slip." Helen stared down at the kitchen table. Oak worn, the same one she and her husband had picked out 35 years ago. Mark had spilled juice on it the day it arrived. She'd scrubbed it clean herself. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "I do now," Victor said. Pulled the time-stamped submission. It was him. No question. Helen didn't sit. She paced slowly, palm pressed flat against the cool marble counter. The calm in her voice was unnerving, even to her. "Gloria said something to me last night," she murmured. "What's that?" She said they've mistaken my silence for weakness. Victor was silent for a beat. Then they wouldn't be the first. Helen exhaled, steady as steel. "They're going to learn the ground isn't theirs. It never was." Victor's voice came through again, firm. "Then let me finish what I started. I'll file an alert on the fraudulent submission. If they try this again, it'll trigger a legal response. Do it." As she ended the call, Helen looked up at the ceiling. The muffled thump of Mark's footsteps above her head felt different now, less permanent, less sure. He had no idea the legal floor beneath him had already begun to crack, and this time no renovation would fix it. The printer hummed low in Victor Shaw's office, spitting out paper like a machine exhaling secrets. Helen sat across the desk, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. A cup of stale coffee sat untouched beside her. The documents were warm when Victor slid them across the polished mahogany surface, but the heat that rose in Helen's chest had nothing to do with temperature. "You need to see this," he said simply. Helen adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. There, in cheap blue ink and crooked lines, was her name, Helen E. Granger, crudely scrawled into a property modification form. Right below it, in neater, smug handwriting, sat Mark A. Granger. "He submitted this 2 weeks ago," Victor said, tapping the corner of the page. "Claimed it was an ownership update. County clerk flagged the signature as inconsistent. We're lucky someone in the office still remembers your husband's estate case from 10 years back." Helen stared at the paper, every part of her motionless except her eyes. She took it all in, the shaky forge of her name. The date, the laughable sloppiness. Mark hadn't even tried to match her penmanship. He didn't need to in his mind. He thought she was already conquered. "He just handed me the rope," she said quietly. Victor raised a brow. "Excuse me?" Helen looked up, a thin, bitter smile forming. He thinks he's building a foundation. He's actually digging his own hole. Victor leaned back, tapping his pen on the table. Then let's tighten the noose. They spent the next hour filing the formal fraud alert with the county clerk's office. Victor typed with rapid precision, his fingers dancing across the keyboard like a surgeon prepping for a clean incision. Helen provided every detail: dates, account numbers, utility records, and a notarized copy of the original deed. It wasn't just revenge. It was documentation, order, truth. And now it had a legal timestamp. Later that afternoon, Helen pulled into Gloria's driveway, gravel crunching under the tires like a warning shot. Gloria opened the door before Helen even knocked, a stack of banker's boxes behind her. Tax returns, utility bills, maintenance receipts. Gloria said, dragging a box forward. I even found that contractor invoice from when Mark supervised the roof repair and let it leak for 3 weeks. Helen took the box in her arms, the weight oddly comforting. He really thought I'd let this go. Gloria snorted. He's always counted on you being tired, not done. They sorted the documents on Gloria's dining table, the scent of lemon pledge thick in the air. Helen worked quietly, sorting and labeling, her movements sharp and precise. Gloria kept an eye on the window like a hawk, watching for snakes. You know, Gloria said suddenly. Tina was out front earlier yapping with Marjorie from next door. Helen didn't look up. What'd she say? Oh, just that they're gonna renovate the guest bath once the house is theirs. Smiled like she already had the keys in her purse. Helen didn't blink. Let her measure the walls. I've already pulled the floor out. The next morning, Helen received an official voicemail from the county clerk. Her hands didn't shake as she played it, standing by the kitchen window with her robe still cinched tight. Victor had forwarded the message too. Subject line, fraud action initiated. The voice was calm, but the words burned like wildfire. We've completed our internal review and determined that the attempted ownership update submitted by Mark A. Granger was fraudulent. His submission has been flagged and legal notice will be issued under Missouri Title 442. Fraudulent conveyances. You remain the sole legal owner of the property. Helen set her phone down and stared out the window at the backyard. A patchy lawn, garden beds dormant for fall, and Mark pacing on the phone, one hand flailing, mouth moving fast. She couldn't hear his voice. She didn't need to. He was already losing his grip, and the soil beneath him had turned to sand. The copy machine in Victor's office ticked and groaned like it too was growing tired of Mark Granger's audacity. Helen stood beside it, feeding in another stack of papers, with the quiet focus of someone preparing for trial, not war, but something colder, something permanent. Each document had a story. A utility bill in her name from 1989, a furnace replacement invoice addressed to Mrs. H. Granger, escrow letters, insurance renewals, tax filings. Her paper trail stretched longer than Mark's work history. Her name was on every line, every check, every receipt. No co-signers, no witnesses, just Helen, unshakable, undeniable. Victor stood beside her, reviewing each scan as it uploaded. This, he said, tapping one page marked property. Tax paid in full 2002, isn't just a defense, it's a full strike. Helen didn't nod. She just reached for the next folder. He thought I wouldn't keep records. Victor's mouth twitched. Most people don't. I'm not most people. By noon, Victor had assembled a file the size of a phone book. They submitted it to the county under formal notice of contested ownership. Victor's wording was surgical, measured lethal. He referenced fraudulent intent, false conveyance, and demanded formal dismissal of Mark Granger's attempted claim. It won't just block his changes, Victor said. It'll remove him from consideration in any future claim. His name's off the table, permanently. Helen's voice was low. Do it. That afternoon, Mark's world cracked. It started with a phone call at the kitchen table. Helen sat with her crossword puzzle pen in hand, while Mark took the call on speaker, chewing cereal like a teenager with zero urgency. Yes, this is Mark Granger. What do you mean fraudulent activity? His voice faltered. Helen didn't look up. What do you mean I'm not on file? The person on the other end, likely some underpaid clerk, spoke quickly. Helen could only catch phrases. Legally invalid, and exclusive ownership confirmed, and you have no standing. Mark stood. No, there's been a mistake. My mother lives with me. Helen set her pen down slowly. Correction, she said, calmly. You live with me. His head snapped toward her. You filed something. You're sabotaging us. Tina barreled in from the hallway, towel around her wet hair, face pinched. What is going on? Mark rounded on her, phone still clutched tight. She filed something. She's trying to take the house from us. Tina's eyes widened like a child catching the edge of a punishment. You said this was handled. You said the papers were good. Helen stood, crossed the kitchen slowly, and poured herself a fresh glass of water. Her movement was unhurried, intentional. Tina spun toward her. You're sabotaging us. You want us out. Helen turned, sipping once, then placed the glass on the counter. No, she said. I'm saving myself. Gloria, who had let herself in moments earlier with a quiet knock and no need for permission, raised both eyebrows from the doorway. She's giving you the consequence you earned. You don't get to come in here. Mark barked, but Gloria just stepped forward, calm as a rattlesnake in heat. Son, she said flatly, you tried to steal a house that was never yours, with forged paperwork and a smug little smirk. She took a slow breath. You should be thankful she's not pressing criminal charges. Mark looked to Helen, but her eyes were unreadable, ancient, steeled. She stole our future. Tina hissed. No, Helen said, barely above a whisper. He stole a chair. I stole his foundation. Mark's jaw clenched as he stared at her, a man realizing his foot was already halfway through a crumbling floorboard. Later that evening, Victor called. Helen sat in her bedroom, reviewing the last of her bank statements, when the phone lit up. She answered quietly, her tone as even as ever. I may have something, Victor said. A cash buyer. Discreet. Local developer looking for fast closings. Helen didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick with deliberation. Victor cleared his throat. They're ready to make an offer, sight unseen. Helen looked toward the window, where dusk cast long shadows across her lawn, the one Mark always promised to modernize. Set the meeting, she said softly. Let's see how fast the ground can move. The for sale listing went live at 9:14 a.m. sharp. Victor didn't blink as he clicked publish, the cursor hovering like a match over gasoline. The description was careful, respectful, charming 3-bed, 2-bath home in quiet South County neighborhood. One owner, meticulously maintained, cash buyers only, no contingencies. Helen watched from across his desk. Will they know? Not unless they're looking, Victor replied, not unkindly, and we both know they're not. By 10:30, 3 buyers had requested showings. The house was already turning. That afternoon, Helen watched from the kitchen window as Mark backed his truck down the drive, music blaring, Tina in the passenger seat. She waited until the tires disappeared around the corner before moving. Her steps were fast but composed. She didn't run. Gloria stood at the corner with a thermos in hand, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. She tapped her phone once. Code for clear buyer'll be here in 10, she said when Helen approached. Good. Helen didn't look back at the house. Let's get them inside before the ghosts come home. The buyer, a young woman in a dark blazer and spotless sneakers, arrived right on time. Helen ushered her in with the calm grace of a woman giving a tour of her legacy, not a home she was about to leave. Hardwood floors, original trim, kitchen updated in 2017. I kept the pantry big, Helen noted quietly. People forget food needs room to breathe. Upstairs, she opened the linen closet with a flick of the wrist. Insulated pipes, never froze, not once. Even when the whole street lost heat in 2013. The woman took notes, nodded, asked questions. Helen answered all of them softly, precisely, like someone folding away memories one drawer at a time. They exited through the side door, out past the small garden Helen had nursed for years. Her peonies hadn't bloomed this year. Too much shade, too many lies. Back at the curb, Gloria raised her brows as the buyer drove away. She's gonna bite. I know, Helen said. The second showing came 2 days later. Another clean sweep. Gloria kept watch from the porch across the street, pretending to water potted mums that hadn't been alive since Easter. They had a whole system now, calls timed during Mark and Tina's errands, curtains adjusted for discretion, light baking to add warmth. Helen made chicken pot pie, one afternoon, the scent drifting through the house like a smoke screen. The kitchen stayed spotless. Her smile never cracked. At dinner that night, Mark laughed as he stabbed a piece of roast with his fork. Can't believe you're still cooking every night. Not like you've got much else going on. Tina rolled her eyes. She likes it. It's cute. Helen nodded silently, jotting something in her planner beside her napkin. She didn't glance up. Probably keeps her feeling useful, Tina added under her breath. Useful. The word folded into her notes like a pin in fabric. She had pages now, phrases, quotes, jabs, a log of every petty insult and condescending pat on the head. She didn't write them in anger. She wrote them the way archivists record history, so the evidence can outlast the moment. On Friday, a third buyer arrived. He didn't say much, just walked the halls slowly, tapping walls with his knuckle, checking windows for draft. His suit was charcoal. Expensive. His silence was not disinterest. It was calculation. When he left, Victor called 10 minutes later. He offered full cash. Over asking. Wants to close fast. 2 weeks. Helen stared out the window at the streetlights, flickering on. Somewhere beyond the blinds, Mark was pulling into the driveway, stereo too loud for a neighborhood that had long since grown up. Accept it, she said, her voice steady. Let's see what they look like without a roof. The contract was 13 pages long, but Helen only needed to see one line. Buyer agrees to purchase property at full cash offer, no contingencies. She signed it with a steady hand, and handed the pen back to Victor, who nodded once, his expression unreadable, except for the flicker of admiration in his eyes. Closings in 14 business days, he said. Wire transfer will hit your account the same morning. Clean, legal, silent. Helen folded the paperwork carefully, smoothing the edges like a nurse dressing a wound. Good, she said. I want it to bruise before it breaks. Victor offered a rare smile. This is surgical. She didn't smile back. Then we cut deep. That night, Mark and Tina were late to dinner. Again. The roast had cooled by the time they walked through the door, laughing about something Helen didn't care to understand. Their shoes clomped loudly across the hardwood shoes that would not cross this threshold for much longer. Mark dropped into his usual seat, the one he'd stolen weeks ago, and forked a potato wedge before Helen could set the last plate down. God, I can't wait until this place is officially mine, he said, between bites. Gonna redo the kitchen first. This layout's prehistoric. Helen poured him water, the ice cubes clinking like glass breaking. We'll keep the oak paneling though, Tina added, sipping her wine. Once we gut the walls and open it up, ugh, the resale's gonna double. Helen sat slowly, napkin draped neatly over her lap. We'll see, Mark laughed. No whiff about it, Mom. You'll be relaxing somewhere sunny. Assisted living by the river, right? Tina raised her glass. To future comfort. Gloria's words came back to Helen. Then let them toast to smoke while you lay down fire. She smiled faintly and raised her own glass, clinking Tina's with barely a tap. The next morning, Helen dressed early in slacks and a windbreaker, just enough to pass as out for errands. Gloria arrived with coffee and a hard-to-hide glint in her eye. Together they watched from across the street as the realtor's white van pulled up, and 2 men stepped out with wooden stakes and a red and white sign wrapped in plastic. Helen sipped her coffee slowly. You think he'll see it first thing? Gloria didn't blink. I hope he's holding something when he does. Makes the drop more dramatic. The hammer strikes echoed faintly. 1, 2, 3, until the sale pending sign stood upright in the lawn like a gravestone. Bright. Unavoidable. By late afternoon, The sun had shifted, casting a clean shadow across the grass. Mark's truck returned just before 5, bass thumping, tires skidding a little too fast into the driveway. From the window, Helen watched him step out and freeze. He stared at the sign like it was a foreign object. Then, slowly, like the knowledge needed to sink into his bones before he could react, he turned toward the front door. The first scream wasn't loud. It was sharp, high-pitched, then clipped off like someone had slammed a window shut mid-sentence. Helen heard it from the laundry room. She folded a bath towel with perfect corners and set it aside before stepping into the hallway. Through the front window, Mark stood frozen in the yard, just feet from the sale pending sign. His mouth moved without sound for a few seconds before his voice returned with full force. "What the hell is this?" The towel in Helen's hand was warm from the dryer. She folded it once more, slowly walked toward the door just as it banged open hard enough to rattle the stained glass insert. "You can't do this," Mark roared, his face flushed, chest heaving. "You didn't even tell us you had no right." Helen stood quietly in the foyer, hands clasped loosely at her waist. Her expression didn't change. "I had every right. It was never yours to begin with." Behind him, Tina appeared on the porch in a robe and slippers, her mascara smudged under one eye. She stared at the sign like it had been written in fire. "This is a joke, right? Tell me this is a joke." Helen stepped aside, motioning to the living room. "If you'd like to talk, kindly stop screaming at the door like salesmen." Mark didn't move. His voice dropped into something lower, more dangerous. "This is sabotage. This is ownership," Helen said. "You gambled with something that wasn't yours. Now you lose." Tina let out a strangled sound and staggered forward, the robe slipping off one shoulder. "Where are we supposed to go? Huh? Where are we gonna live?" Gloria's voice cut through the hallway like a knife from behind Helen. "Wherever people without chairs go." Tina spun toward her, eyes wide. This is you too?" Gloria stepped into the light, arms crossed, unbothered. "I warned you both. You didn't listen. You mocked. Now you pack." Mark looked between the two women, Helen stone-faced and Gloria unmovable, and for the first time something in him cracked. "You're throwing your own son into the street." Helen took a long breath, and when she spoke it was colder than winter air. "You put yourself there. I just opened the door." He stormed past her into the living room, pacing. His footsteps thudded like war drums against the hardwood he used to say he'd replace one day. Tina followed behind him, wringing her hands. "You can't just sell it out from under us," she spat. "We've lived here. You've squatted." Gloria replied. "There's a difference." Helen walked to the kitchen, took a seat and placed her reading glasses on the table. "The closing is finalizing. Escrow will clear by Tuesday." Mark whirled toward her. "Victor's behind this, isn't he? You got that sleazy lawyer to help screw your own family." Helen looked him in the eye, calm and unshaken. "Victor's the reason you're not in jail for falsifying documents. You should be thanking him." He said nothing, just stood, chest heaving, hands clenched into fists. Behind him, Tina began to sob, ugly choking sobs that filled the house with a sound Helen would never forget. Not because it moved her, but because it was so unfamiliar coming from a woman who had only ever used her voice for laughter and cruelty. "I can call someone," Tina muttered. "My sister. She just refinanced her trailer to keep from defaulting." Gloria cut in. "You think she's taking both of you in?" Silence fell. Mark looked down, and Helen saw it, the flicker of realization, not regret, just recognition. The kind a man gets when the wall finally hits his back, and there's nowhere left to lean. Outside, a car door slammed. A courier in a navy blazer walked up the steps with a sealed white envelope in hand. Helen stood to meet him. The man didn't smile, didn't speak, just handed her the envelope and left without ceremony. She opened it slowly, scanning the top sheet. Then she turned to face the room. "Eviction notice," she said plainly. "Effective 10 days from today. Filed. Stamped. Enforced." Mark's lips parted like he might argue, but the ground under him was gone. "And Helen," She was already walking over it, untouched and untouchable. The courtroom was cold, unapologetically so. Not from the air conditioning, but from the weight of people hoping to win things they no longer owned. Helen sat in the second row behind Victor, her hands resting neatly on her lap, her eyes steady as stone. Across the aisle, Mark adjusted his collar for the third time. His suit didn't fit quite right. Too new, too stiff, like he bought it for intimidation but forgot how to wear shame. Tina sat beside him, in a pale pink blouse, makeup layered too thick to hide the panic underneath. Mark Granger versus Helen Granger, the clerk called out. The judge, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and no tolerance for drama, looked down at the filing in front of her. Her glasses slid low on her nose as she read the motion. Emergency injunction to stop a property transfer, she said. Filed by Mr. Granger, against his mother. The courtroom let out a quiet shift of breath, one part disbelief, one part anticipation. Mark stood quickly. Your Honor, my mother is of declining capacity. She's making irrational decisions under influence. We've lived in that house for years. Victor rose without looking back at Helen. May I? The judge nodded once. Victor walked to the podium like he'd done it 1,000 times, because he had. Your Honor, the petitioner submitted this emergency filing claiming undue influence, mental instability, an inherited right to the property. What he failed to include, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, is that he attempted to add his name to the property through a forged tax document. Twice. The judge's head snapped up. Victor handed the documents over. These are copies of the submissions, handwritten edits, inconsistent signatures. We've had them verified and flagged by the county clerk's office. The original deed and every tax record for the last 33 years are in my client's name alone. No co-owner, no transfers, just Mrs. Helen Granger. Mark's face flushed crimson. That's a lie. I didn't forge. The judge raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Granger. Tina grabbed his arm. Mark, she whispered. Just sit, please. He dropped into his seat, seething. Victor continued, voice calm as snowfall. This isn't a family dispute. This is a legal overreach, based on fraud. Mr. Granger is not entitled to ownership, residency, or occupancy. The house is already under contract. Escrow is closing. The judge flipped through the evidence. She stopped on one form, Mark's handwriting scrawled in clumsy ink. Her lips pressed into a hard, flat line. She turned to Mark. Did you submit this document? Mark opened his mouth, then hesitated. I was told it was allowed. My mother gave verbal consent. The judge slammed her gavel once, just enough to silence the room, not end the hearing. Verbal consent doesn't override a deed, and forged documentation doesn't hold up in my courtroom. Tina's face collapsed. Tears welled instantly, but they weren't grief. They were exposure. Ugly, public unraveling. We thought, she stammered, her voice cracking. We didn't think she'd actually go through with it. She did, the judge snapped. And from where I'm sitting, she did everything legally. You two, on the other hand, she held up the forged form again. This alone could qualify for criminal charges. Helen didn't move, didn't blink. She sat so still the court reporter glanced at her twice to make sure she was breathing. Gloria, seated beside her, leaned in just enough for Helen to hear. You didn't just pull the rug, she whispered. You pulled the whole damn ground. The judge looked out over the room. My ruling is as follows. The sale stands. The injunction is denied. The eviction is valid and enforceable under Missouri law. You have 6 days. Tina let out a sob so loud it echoed. Mark looked down at the table, both hands gripping its edge like it could keep him from sinking. Helen stood only when the judge exited. She didn't gloat. She didn't look back, because there was nothing behind her worth looking at. The moving trucks pulled up at 8:03 a.m. sharp, 2 gleaming white vans marked with blue lettering that read, Legacy Relocation Services. Helen stood at the top of the porch steps in a gray windbreaker, clipboard in hand, her back straight and her eyes narrowed to the exact angle of a forewoman surveying a controlled demolition. The first man out of the truck nodded to her with professional ease. "Mrs. Granger?" "Yes," she said calmly. "Everything marked with blue tape goes with me. The rest stays, or rather goes with them. Pack my things carefully. No rush." She stepped aside as the movers filed in with dolly carts, gloves, and padded blankets, the air already filling with the clatter of plastic bins and the thump of cardboard folding flat. The morning smelled like cold dew and fresh beginnings. Inside, Mark stood barefoot in the living room, mouth hanging open, shirt wrinkled from a night of tossing. Tina lingered behind him on the stairs, clutching her phone and blinking hard. "What is this?" Mark barked, stepping toward Helen as the first boxes slid past him. "You're actually doing this today?" Helen walked to the kitchen without answering. She removed a single glass from the cupboard, hers, and placed it carefully in a bubble-wrapped sleeve. "You've had 6 days," she said, without turning around. "That's what the judge gave you." "I gave you twice that." Tina's voice cracked. "We thought you'd, I don't know." "Calm down. Come to your senses." "I did," Helen replied. "That's why I'm leaving. And you're not coming with me." Outside, 2 neighbors had already drifted onto their porches. Mr. Lanning from across the street leaned against his mailbox, arms crossed. The Johnson girl sat on her stoop with a bag of popcorn, like she was watching a parade. Even the mailman slowed his step as he passed the house. Mark noticed the eyes. He shoved a plastic storage bin hard against the wall. "She betrayed us. After everything we did for her." Helen turned, holding a framed photograph in her hands. It was one of the few she chose to take her and her late husband in front of the house, the day they closed on it, 1987, both of them sunburned and beaming. "You squatted in a house I built," she said evenly. "Mocked me, used me, tried to steal from me. That's not betrayal, Mark. That's math. You're throwing your own son out like trash." Tina yelled. Helen looked her over, head to toe, like she was scanning a return item she'd never requested. "No, Tina. I'm cleaning house." Tina opened her mouth, but Gloria appeared in the doorway before the next protest could land. "Basement's done," Gloria said, smirking. "I told the movers to take the cedar chest. It was hers before it was yours." Mark's fists clenched. "You brought her in on this." "Of course," Helen said, walking to the hallway and pulling her wedding dress from a garment bag. "Because she's never tried to steal my life." One of the movers passed by again. "Excuse me, ma'am, what about the dining set?" Helen paused, then looked straight at Mark. "Leave the chairs. I don't need them anymore." Mark turned red. By mid-afternoon, the driveway was filled with boxes stacked in neat rows, some marked Helen, others left unmarked. The distinction was silent, humiliating, final. Tina sat on the front steps with a box of tangled jewelry and unopened mail, eyes glassy. Mark paced in small furious circles beside her, like a dog too proud to sit, but too beaten to bark. In the kitchen, Helen signed the last inventory sheet, then glanced down at her phone. A notification blinked on screen. "Incoming wire deposit. $2,180,000. Cleared, confirmed." Victor's message came through 1 minute later. "Funds received. Title transferred. You are now officially a tenant of no one." Helen didn't smile. She simply reached for her purse, slipped her phone inside, and walked toward the front door, where the house she once gave freely was now hers again, paid in full by someone who never once called her slow. The metal keys sat in Helen's palm, still warm from her skin, but cold in every other way that mattered. 3 keys, front, back, garage. She turned them over once, slowly, then closed her hand around them like a goodbye. The new buyer, a young woman in a navy blazer and glossy heels, waited patiently beside the porch column, eyes bright, clipboard in hand. Helen didn't rush. Instead, she looked around the front yard one final time. The morning air was sharp with the scent of damp leaves and freshly mowed grass. It would be someone else's lawn now. Someone else's Sunday. "You're sure this is everything?" the buyer asked gently. Helen nodded. "Everything that matters. Yes." She placed the keys in the woman's hand, not with hesitation, but with precision. finality. Like snipping a ribbon before watching a ship drift from harbor. Behind them, Mark and Tina stood stiffly on the curb beside two beat-up plastic totes and a dented suitcase with a broken wheel. Tina wore a pair of Ugg boots, mismatched from wear, and clutched her phone like it might deliver salvation. Mark hadn't spoken since the night before, when his call to Brad's cousin in Wentzville ended with a terse, "We're full sorry." They had knocked on doors, metaphorical and literal, and found none of them open. Mark now looked 10 years older than he had when this started. Face drawn, eyes sunken, his jaw twitched each time a neighbor passed by and didn't wave. Tina caught Helen's eye across the lawn. "You could have given us time," she hissed. "You wanted to see us like this." Helen looked at her calmly. "I gave you time. You spent it mocking me." A horn honked from the driveway. Gloria sat behind the wheel of her cream-colored Buick, window rolled down, sunglasses perched low. "Clock's ticking, boss." Helen walked down the steps, heels crunching against the gravel. Mark turned toward her suddenly, mouth opening like he wanted to say something, maybe to bargain, maybe to blame. She didn't stop. As she slid into the passenger seat, Gloria passed her a hot coffee and raised a brow. "Feel like you're levitating yet?" Helen exhaled. "Not quite, but I'm lighter." They pulled away slowly, the view in the rearview mirror shrinking with every foot. Tina sat on the curb now, legs tucked under her, scrolling her phone like it owed her something. Mark stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the front door, as if sheer anger might unlock it again. It wouldn't. 10 minutes later, Helen and Gloria pulled into the condo parking lot. It was quiet. Neat hedges, wide walkways, the low hum of nearby sprinklers. Two men in polos and tool belts were unloading a washer into a neighboring unit. Helen watched them for a moment, then stepped out of the car. Inside, the condo smelled like new paint and cedar. Clean slate. The windows were open, letting in late summer air. On the kitchen island sat a vase of fresh flowers and a note from the real estate agent. "Welcome home, Helen. You earned this," Victor called just as she placed the flowers in a new glass vase. "It's done," he said without preamble. "All filings closed. Title transferred. Bank confirmed wire. You're in the clear." Helen leaned against the counter, watching the blinds sway gently in the breeze. "Feels like I just climbed out of a basement." Victor chuckled. "More like you pulled someone into one." Gloria popped her head in from the living room, where she was already inspecting the thermostat. "Tell him he's right." Helen smiled, faint and sharp. "Clean break, you said." Victor's voice softened. "The cleanest I've seen." She hung up and walked to the dining nook where a single armchair sat by a round glass table. She pulled it back and lowered herself into the seat. Slowly, deliberately. The chair didn't wobble. She sat at the head of her own table again. "No more stolen chairs," she murmured. Just as she reached for her tea, Gloria stepped back inside from the patio, holding her phone out like it was on fire. "You'll want to see this," she said. Tina just walked into that strip mall boutique on South County Road, job application in hand. Helen didn't even blink. She just stirred her tea, slowly. The fall was beginning, and it was going to be long. The motel smelled like mildew masked with dollar store lemon cleaner. The kind of place where the curtains never fully closed, and the AC unit made a wet mechanical wheeze all night long. Tina sat cross-legged on the scratchy bedspread, scrolling through Craigslist housing ads with glazed-over eyes. Every few seconds, she clicked her tongue and kept scrolling. Either the rent was too high, or the landlord required a credit check, or worse, a co-signer. Mark sat on the floor with his back to the chipped nightstand, surrounded by a sea of opened manila envelopes. He was thumbing through rejection letters, 3 job interviews, 0 callbacks. His phone buzzed again. He didn't answer. They were on their 3rd motel in 2 weeks. The first was in South County, close enough to the neighborhood to pretend this was temporary. The second was further west, cheaper with a broken vending machine. This one, near a freeway exit, across from a gas station and an adult video store, was where the pretense had finally died. Mark stood abruptly and paced the tiny room, the soles of his sneakers squeaking against the tile. "I built everything in that house," he muttered. My tools. My sweat. Tina didn't look up. She owned it before you ever held a wrench. I upgraded the gutters. Yeah, Tina snorted. And clogged the drains with your temper. Mark fell silent. For once he had no comeback. Outside, the neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly through the curtains. Somewhere down the hall, someone was yelling at a child. A dog barked, and within that noise something else settled in permanence. The fall hadn't just started, it was almost done. They had called everyone they knew. Brad didn't answer. Tina's college roommate wasn't in town. Mark's old friend Darren claimed he was mid-Reno, which everyone knew meant, you're not welcome here. No one wanted the burden. Especially not for people who had spent the last 5 years posting pictures of steaks, wine nights and adulting victories on Facebook. Now those same friends whispered. Didn't he say the house was his? She evicted her own son. Sounds like he got greedy. Real shame. Lottery losers without a ticket. Meanwhile, across town, Helen sat by her condo's window as soft jazz filled the air and golden afternoon light warmed her new rug. She cradled a cup of Earl Grey in one hand, a hardcover mystery novel in the other. There were no slamming doors, no footsteps overhead, no eyes rolling at her cooking, just silence. The good kind. Her phone buzzed once. A text from Victor. Final docs sent. You're officially closed out. Free and clear. He included a champagne emoji. Helen smirked and replied with a thumbs up. That evening, Gloria hosted a dinner in her backyard. Lanterns strung between the trees, grilled salmon on real china, not paper plates. Helen arrived in cream slacks and a slate blue blouse, not a wrinkle in sight. To freedom. Gloria toasted, raising her glass. To fresh air, Helen added. To making selfish men choke on paperwork, Gloria replied with a wink. They laughed rich and deep, laughter that tasted earned. Later, as the fire pit crackled low and the sky turned a velvety black, Helen's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Victor. It was an alert from a local court filing app she subscribed to for estate monitoring. The name in bold was unmistakable. Granger, Mark A. Chapter 7, Bankruptcy Filing. She stared at it for a moment, letting the words settle. Chapter 7, The Big Fall. The Clean Wipe. The final unraveling of someone who had once thought the world owed him the deeds his mother paid for. She didn't forward the notice to Gloria. She didn't need to. Instead, she set her phone down, leaned back in her chair and listened to the wood crackle and pop. Somewhere across town, a man who once stole her seat now had nothing left to sit on but the floor of a borrowed room. Mark stared at the courthouse wall like it had personally betrayed him. Beige paint, faded plaques, a vending machine that hummed louder than the silence between him and Tina. The clerk had just handed them a stamped packet. Chapter 7, Bankruptcy, Discharge Finalized. The last page included a list of closed accounts, frozen lines of credit, and a grim note in bold, no future claim on previously contested property permitted under order of Judge Melvin, Circuit Court of St. Louis County. His name had been legally erased from a house he never actually owned. It was official now, permanent. Tina dropped the manila folder into her oversized handbag and muttered, "Well, that's it, we're ghosts." Mark didn't reply. He had no more tantrums left, just a dull ache where his ego used to be. Back across town, Helen stood at her kitchen counter, spooning wildflower honey into her tea, while the soft ticking of a wall clock echoed through the calm. She unfolded a letter from Victor, a hard copy, because he knew she still preferred paper for the important things. At the top, in his signature clean font, restitution secured. Title rights exclusive. Her accounts were untouched, protected from Mark's implosion. Every dollar remained intact. And more importantly, her legacy had no parasites attached. She ran her finger along the embossed edge of the paper and smiled. It was the kind of smile you only earn through fire. That afternoon, Helen drove past her old neighborhood for the first time since handing over the keys. She didn't slow, didn't need to. A child's bike now lay on the front lawn. A new family had already begun their story there. She had no reason to look back, except one. Stopping at the corner before turning off the block, She reached into her glove box and pulled out a white envelope. Inside was a check for $75,000 made out to McClellan Middle School, the same school she'd worked at as registrar for 29 years. The memo line read, "For the ones who keep track of things." Helen slipped the envelope into the drop box outside the district office. No ceremony, no need for applause, just correction, just balance. That evening, Gloria invited her over for celebratory crab cakes and old-fashioned cocktails. They ate on her porch as twilight fell, the air scented with lilac and fried garlic. Gloria leaned back, swirling her drink, from registrar to executioner. "I always knew you had it in you." Helen chuckled, low and even. "I kept records." He kept losses. Gloria raised her glass. "To documentation, to boundaries," Helen replied, and they clinked glasses. As the sky deepened to navy, Gloria scrolled her phone and froze, her brows arched, eyes gleaming. "Oh, you'll love this." She turned the screen toward Helen. It was a screenshot of a local news segment, titled in bold, flaming text, "St. Louis Mother Evicts Ungrateful Son, Legal Battle Goes Viral." The thumbnail image was Mark's mug in mid-shout, caught outside the courtroom. Tina hovered beside him, half turned away from the camera. Helen stared at it for a beat, expression unreadable. Then she reached for her cocktail, took a slow sip and said simply, "Good." She didn't need the world's sympathy, but its attention? That was justice too. Helen didn't expect to go viral. She hadn't written a blog, hadn't made a speech, hadn't taken a selfie on the courthouse steps. But someone, maybe the young court clerk, or the realtor's assistant, had whispered her story to a local Facebook group. And from there it had spread like wild thyme in a neglected garden, quiet at first, then everywhere at once. By the time she saw it for herself, the post had 4,200 shares. Woman 71, evicts entitled son from her paid-off home. Legal receipts and poetic revenge included. Attached was a screenshot of the news headline, the now infamous quote, "He stole my chair. I stole his foundation." In the comments, strangers flooded in, nurses, single mothers with passive-aggressive sons and weaponized daughters-in-law. Women who'd been told to sit down, hush up, and be grateful. She didn't burn bridges. She bulldozed the map. "My mom let my brother walk all over her. Wish she'd had this kind of fight. Helen, if you're reading this, you are my hero." She read those words slowly, a cup of tea going cold in her hand. Her eyes didn't water, but something beneath her ribs felt fuller, like the ache of an old bruise that had finally started healing. A week later, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. "Dear Grandma Helen, we saw you on the news. We didn't know everything. We're sorry. But also we're proud. I told Mom what you did." She cried. The good kind of cry. "You taught us that peace doesn't mean silence. Love, Ellen and Jonah." She traced her fingers over their names, her grandchildren, now old enough to see the difference between keeping peace and being kept quiet. That Sunday, Gloria picked her up in the Buick and drove them to the farmer's market. As they strolled past the honey jars and homemade jams, two women, late 30s maybe 40s, stopped Helen with shy smiles. "You're her, right?" one said. "The lady who didn't let them win." Helen raised one brow, amused. "Depends on who them is." The woman laughed. "You changed the way I see myself. I told my husband I want the deed to our house in writing. He didn't even blink. I think he's scared now." "Good," Helen said, then leaned in. "Let him wonder. It keeps the balance." Back at home, Helen did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She furniture shopped, not online, not secondhand. She walked into a showroom, ran her hands over polished oak and walnut, and chose a dining set that made her chest lift. 6 chairs, all high-backed, all equal in height. But only one had arms. She pointed to it. "That one," she said. "Head of the table, leave it uncovered." The delivery arrived on a Thursday. She brewed chamomile as the movers unpacked. The legs scraped gently over her condo's hardwood floors. Helen circled the table once, fingers brushing the back of each seat, then settled into the head chair. It didn't creak, didn't shift. It held her like it had always been waiting. That evening, Victor called. "I hope you know," he said. "You turned humiliation into history. Most people just stew. You published." Helen chuckled softly. "You're giving me too much credit." "No," he said. "You gave yourself credit. That's the rare part." Gloria stopped by that night, with a bottle of red and 2 glasses. "To all the quiet women," she said, pouring, "who knew more than they ever let on." Helen raised her glass. "And to the ones who finally spoke." After Gloria left, Helen sat at her new table, the chair hugging her spine. She opened her laptop. Blank document. Black cursor blinking in rhythm like a heartbeat. She stared at it for a long time, sipping her wine, then began to type. Title: The Ground Beneath Me, by Helen Granger. Chapter 1. He stole my chair, so I pulled the ground out from under him. And with that, she started writing the story the world didn't know it was waiting for. The sun slipped through the wide condo windows in soft golden slants, brushing the floor with light. Helen sat at her round table, oak smooth-grained, sturdy, and the chair beneath her held every inch of her weight like it had been built just for her. This one didn't wobble. This one didn't mock her knees or steal her place. This one was hers. The morning was quiet except for the low hum of the coffee pot in the corner, and the occasional flutter of leaves brushing against the window. She sipped slowly from a thick porcelain mug, steam curling up into her face like a blessing. Footsteps padded down the hall, light, familiar, purposeful. Gloria appeared in the doorway, with 2 cinnamon rolls in hand and a crooked smile. "Still sitting in the throne, I see." Helen smirked, not planning to give it up. Gloria set the rolls on a plate and slid into the chair across from her. "Do you think he thought of you this morning?" Helen shrugged. "Maybe, but if he did, it was from a mattress with broken springs and a checkout time." They laughed, not loudly, but richly. The kind of laughter that came with age scars, and the kind of victories people didn't believe you were capable of. The phone buzzed on the counter. Helen reached over, glanced at the screen, and answered. "Victor," she greeted. "Mrs. Granger," came his voice, smooth as always. "I'll keep it short. All filings closed. No pending claims. Everything is sealed and final. Legally, you're untouchable." Helen leaned back in her chair, eyes closing for a breath. "That has a nice ring to it." "It's earned," Victor said. "You didn't just survive. You architected something permanent. I had good counsel. You had better instincts." She thanked him, ended the call, and placed the phone down gently, as if the news might still ripple through the wood. Gloria raised her brow. "That our victory lap?" Helen nodded once. "Final one. No loose ends." Later that afternoon, she opened her fireproof safe and pulled out the envelope labeled "Will." She sat again at the table, her table, and carefully crossed out 2 names. Then, in slow, precise cursive, she added 2 others. Ellie Granger, Jonah Granger. She sealed the envelope with wax and tucked it back into the safe. Outside, the sun shifted westward, shadows curling and stretching across the living room like long exhalations. The condo smelled of coffee and warm pastry. Everything around her felt earned, and none of it felt borrowed. "You ever think you'd be here?" Gloria asked from the couch, flipping through a magazine. After everything, Helen considered it, watching the light settle on her dining table like a crown. "I always hoped I would," she said. "But I never expected it to feel this quiet. Peace tends to surprise us that way." Helen nodded slowly. "Peace tastes like ownership." The words hung in the air, soft but undeniable. As the evening crept in, she poured herself a small glass of wine and sat at her desk, laptop open, manuscript waiting. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, before typing one final sentence at the end of the introduction to The Ground Beneath Me. "My son snatched my chair at dinner, so I pulled the ground out from under him." She hit save, and the silence that followed didn't ache. It sang.